All right, it's been about 2 minutes, so let's go ahead and get started. So once again, my name is Joseph Eisenman. We're here today to discuss Share Your Story campaigns, how-tos and best practices. Before we dive in, I want to share a few housekeeping items. First, this session will be recorded and the recording and slides, well, we don't have slides today, will be distributed after the event. Second, you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen a chat box and a Q&A submission form. We encourage you to use that to chat throughout the session to share your own insights and also submit questions for a Q&A that will be at the end of this. Then we'll go through the questions at the end of the presentation. So to get us started, we're ready to dive into the content. I'm really excited to be joined here today with Brandon Graham. We have personally worked together on a few different items as a partner with Quorum and with NAMI. Brandon serves as a director of advocacy at the National Alliance on Mental Illness, aka NAMI, the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization. Brandon oversees NAMI's grassroots and grasstops advocate development and mobilization, leveraging NAMI's voice and stories of lived experiences to transform public policy. He directs and executes advocacy campaigns to achieve NAMI's policy goals, such as NAMI's Vote for Mental Health and Reimagine Crisis campaigns. Brandon also leads efforts to expand the organization's advocacy presence on social media. Thanks for joining us here today, Brandon. We're so glad to have you here today to discuss how your team at NAMI uses Share Your Story campaigns to achieve your advocacy goals.
So great to be here.
With that, we'll go ahead and get started. So, to get our conversation started and set the scene for our audience, I'd love to hear a little bit about NAMI's work on and grassroots advocacy plays and how grassroots advocacy plays a role. So one of the main campaign types you highlighted in your story campaigns, I'd love to hear how you approach your story campaigns and why you prioritize storytelling in your advocacy strategy.
Sounds great. Thanks, Joseph. So let's take it a step back I just want to share a bit about NAMI. So NAMI is America's largest grassroots mental health organization. I'm based in our national office, which is located in Arlington, but we also have 49 state organizations, over 600 affiliates across the country. We're not just advocacy, but we're also providing support. We have support groups and education programs. We are out there raising awareness of mental health and trying to break down the stigma and discrimination around this topic and ensure people and their families can get the help they need. So my role is making sure that we get people with those experiences involved in the process. NAMI has been around for nearly 45 years. Advocacy has always been a central part of it because our power and our literal founding structure has come from the grassroots. So we want to be able to lift folks up and make them feel comfortable and engaged in the process. This isn't just about sending as many emails as we can out to our folks, but it's thoughtfully finding ways that we can bring people into their interests. One of those things that we definitely need are those stories. Stories power advocacy in general. And I would even go as far to say that advocacy is storytelling. And if you can tell an effective story, that is advocacy. It's hand in hand. Goes very easily together. So what we try to do is we need to always find ways to get people up that ladder of engagement. We can dig in a whole lot more over the course of this hour on that. But for us, without those stories, without people who feel comfortable sharing their story, without the skills or the tools they need to share their story easily, we can't be as effective as advocates. We can't be as effective as lobbyists and as policy leaders. Our work all depends on the grassroots feeling comfortable to share the story. So that's why that's a real priority for us.
Perfect. Really appreciate that. And I love that impact of just how the story carries through for the whole process. So when most folks think of advocacy campaigns, they often think of asking advocates to send a pre-written letter. your organization has written or calling their legislators on the phone. How do you storytelling campaigns work alongside these kinds of more traditional campaigns in your broader strategy?
Oh, I love that question. So for us, it's a sort of all of the above, no wrong door approach. We'll always find ways to get folks to rate their members and contact their members. That is a given, right? Email is still king in the advocacy world, at least until something new pops up. But email in itself really drives a lot of that communication to policymakers, Congress. So for us, it's not a either or, it's a yes and. So we want to make sure people have that lowest level of engagement and weigh in that they feel most comfortable with. We'll get them with a petition through a custom call to action, or we'll get them with a write a letter campaign. But even if we give the option to customize that message, which we do often because we don't want to just send form letters to the Hill, we'll follow that up immediately with a relevant story collection campaign, or even a general bank that we have the ability to sort later on, because someone already took that first step. So now let's see how we can get people into that next level of engagement, which is sharing their story, at least in that written form. We can always figure out different ways to leverage that story afterwards. But while we have them there already, we don't want to lose them. They have a story to tell. They have an experience, even if they don't feel comfortable sharing that yet or haven't received the training to share it. We don't just want to lose them and hope they come back another time. So for us, those two go so closely together. There's always those initial actions that are still important for us to get before our long-term work, being able to quickly capture those stories on the other side, that just pays dividends.
That's amazing. I love the aspect of, first of all, yes, and, which I believe you and I discussed a little bit at a recent conference. And then also the idea of kind of like leveraging them while they're already there and making sure not to lose your audience. Perfect. So oftentimes in advocacy work, we think about the ladder of engagement, a process where we start with small asks and try to build a relationship up to the point where the person we're working with is willing to be more involved. Very related to what we were just talking about. How do you approach that process of bringing someone from the point where they're willing to sign up to the point where they're willing to participate in these story sharing campaigns?
So I think about the ladder of engagement much more than probably I should sometimes, because it really, that's how it all comes down to where you're finding people and how you're getting them engaged. And I know that sounds cliche, but it really matters which options you have available for folks. So I think of it, let's take the first person who stumbles upon NAMI. They want to get involved. They have a story to tell. They just want to get engaged. Something has happened to them, loved one, someone they care about. They just want to turn that experience into advocacy. So we want to get people in the door. We have a few very low-level actions that we keep up in a evergreen way. So think of evergreen issues like just youth mental health in general, the mental health workforce. We want to decriminalize mental illness and make sure that people aren't going to jail when they need help, not handcuffs. Like, we have these different things where people can say, I agree with that, add their name. That's a quick way to get involved. Even let's not even just think about a sign-up form for a moment. Let's just jump straight in. Someone has found this petition that they see themselves in or see their experience and want to raise their hand and say, I'm here and I'm part of that. That also helps us keep track of who's interested in what on the back end. But for them, that is an easy way to get in the door. They provided their name, their email, their phone number, and their address, and they had to click a button and they're in. Great. That's that first level. We don't just target those via advocacy alerts either, or standing statically on our action center, but we plug it into different opportunities throughout the NAMI ecosystem as well. NAMI walks are major events that we have, and people who register for a NAMI Walks event a few days later will receive a petition. Like, take that extra step. Come on in. It's an easy petition. It brings us in. It also lets us know where folks are coming from, but it's just that slight extra next step that they're able to take. Then we look at, all right, we want to start driving those actions. We have a few priority bills that we try to build up. We try to add through them throughout the year. It's not just, oh, this thing is moving at this exact second, we need you to act. But where are these larger priorities that we have that we can constantly drive letters to? The Reentry Act, which is a major priority of NAMI's, to make sure that when people are reentering the community after incarceration, that they're able to stay connected to healthcare. The 988 Implementation Act, to ensure that communities have the resources to help people in crisis around the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. These are bills that, while I would love them to move tomorrow, are not necessarily going to move tomorrow. But now I have someone who took a petition to say, we need help, not handcuffs. And I can follow up with that Write a Letter campaign. Then you've got stories. You've got someone who's taken all of those other actions and is clearly getting involved. And now we can follow up with, hey, you've taken this petition on crisis care. You've written your policymakers about the 988 Implementation Act. Do you have an experience that you feel comfortable sharing? Here are some guiding questions to help just get this process started. Consider sharing your story here. And it really, we want people to take those extra steps and just stay engaged and be part of it. We found some really good success and have collected quite a few stories. And for us, we just want people to feel more comfortable with taking those steps into advocacy.
I love all that. And I'm going off mute just because there's a little background noise going on around me. I love all of that. I love how you kind of progress it along. You also capture the audience while you still got them. So following that thread a little bit further, though, when we talk about mental health and especially mental health advocacy, sharing a story with your legislator and even with advocacy organizations like NAMI can be intimidating or feel a bit vulnerable from the individual. So how do you help people feel comfortable to share their story?
That is something that we think about quite often. It's all about seeing someone as a person and not as just another number in the system or another contact in the database. For us, we take really good care in how we specifically word things, when we're asking people to share their story, how we're helping them frame it. We want people to see that. We also admittedly add a lot of disclaimer language on our landing page about how we're going to use a story. We always commit that we're not going to share identifying information in a story. If we were to use it, we're not going to use anything more than first name and state in a broader story. If we were to use it, we reserve the right to do other things and we will reach out to do so. But we are explicitly clear about how we will use these stories to help people feel a bit more comfortable about that. I'll be honest, there are some where story collection has been difficult because of the nature of the story. Connecting stories specifically about like experiences calling and contacting the 988 Lifeline, that is, you're asking someone to share a story about what could possibly be the worst day of their life, which is incredibly difficult to talk about. There's a lot of healing. There's a lot of processing on someone's wellness journey that leads to the point feeling comfortable sharing. So it's always a work in progress for us. But we want people to understand how we use different stories. We have different examples online for our Reimagine Crisis campaign. We have a web page that lifts up pull quotes that we've used so people can see other stories. We all know, I think we can all agree that hearing someone else share their story does make it slightly less distant in that experience. So seeing other stories can help. It's always a work in progress. We also have a training program, but for general grassroots advocates, we do try to make this as easy as possible for talking about some difficult topics.
Amazing. I really connect with that idea of just kind of like being as clear as possible, really laying it out for people on kind of like what you're going to be doing with, like with their stories. And I really like that idea of kind of like showing them what was shared previously so they're a little bit more comfortable. I saw that I don't know if you saw that question in the general thread. They want the disclaimer language. I'm going to plug for you. They should go take an action on your advocacy page and they can see the language there.
I love that. If you go to NAMI.org/take action, it brings you to our Quorum Action Center where we have a few share our story campaigns. We use a bit, we altered the disclaimer language depending on the piece, right? So if someone is sharing a customized version in a public comment that's being submitted to the administration, like we have a different disclaimer language there versus someone who's sharing in our general story collection. I think we have like 3 or 4 live story banks open on our Action Center. So I think if you click on through, we've got a few great examples there.
What I'm hearing is they have to take action on a lot of different campaigns for you and to support.
I'm not going to say no.
All right, continuing along with kind of the thread we were on. So feeling comfortable sharing something personal can sometimes be only half the battle. How do you help people who might not be professional storytellers make sure that they can feel confident in the way they're delivering and sharing their story?
So I mentioned we have a training program. So taking a quick step back here, NAMI is a federated structure. We are a 501c3 organization. We have all of the state organizations and affiliate organizations. Those are their own nonprofits for the most part. So we are not directly in every community from our national office. We're working throughout our federated alliance structure. And I say that because NAMI has an advocacy training program called NAMI Smarts for Advocacy. We train teachers who then go into the community working with their state organizations to offer NAMI Smarts for Advocacy. It's a skill building training that we offer that teaches people how to tell their story and then how to use that story, telling your story with a policymaker or through contacting a policymaker, meeting or contacting a policymaker. So what we try to do there is we work people through that core module that we have, which is telling your story. We talk about all the keys, like why it's important to tell your story, but we share demystifying tips too. Keeping it brief. We have something in there, especially around this topic, right? Like all of us in the mental health space could probably write a book about things that have happened to us. We could probably write a chapter on one incident alone, but we want to make you only have so much time talking to a policymaker. So we walk people through 7 steps to telling their story. It's a structured way that works for our advocacy, just to help people understand, all right, this is how I structure a story in this context. People who in the NAMI community or are engaging broadly have stories that they have been telling or they feel comfortable telling. They may not be as structured towards advocacy specifically. So the 7 steps is more of this checklist that we can walk people through. Introducing yourself, what happened, what helps, what could have helped, making that about the system, making sure you have your ask. Those aren't all 7 steps. Find your local NAMI and take a NAMI Smarts class if you would like to really dig in. But ultimately, we provide people with a structure. They don't need to be policy experts. They don't need to know all of the things that a professional lobbyist knows. But with this structure, they can take their story and with practice, they can shorten it down into something that helps more easily formulate their story to create policy change. I'll be honest, I've been doing this for 6 years or so at NAMI. The first time I ended up telling my own personal story, I used the 7 steps checklist. It just helped me myself structure it. Low practice what you preach. I used it to tell my own story, and my colleagues have used it as well. It's just by helping advocates see the structure, it helps them build that better. We've taken some of those points and built it into some of the story collection we've done before. We've gotten some really good stories back. So it's always just, for me, half, like you said, half the battle is someone sharing their personal story. The other half is how they're sharing it. So how can we best guide people to do so? And that's on us for what is the structure that works best for our issue or our organizations.
Yeah, I really like that. I like kind of just putting it up front for people so they know the best template possible, or just sharing directly, kind of like, it's almost like creating kind of SOPs for folks on exactly what they need to do. So thinking about the challenge that advocacy teams face in terms of bringing new advocates in to the fold, what tactics do you employ to lower the barriers to people telling their stories?
That is a good one. So for us, I think it comes back to that ladder that we're building. We're trying to demystify it. It's not just this broad thing that people can't see any of the impact on. It's also not a void that people are just talking into. I think a lot of times, especially in our current just climate, people feel getting involved in advocacy is, one, inherently political, or two, just this mystical thing that's far away and isn't going to have a direct impact here. For us, we spend a decent amount of time trying to better look at how we can show that direct impact, or show the direct impact of sharing your story, showing the direct impact of customizing your message to your policymakers. You know, we can all hit submit on a form letter, but it takes that extra step to add your personal story into the larger ask that does elevate it with staff and policymakers. So helping people go, like, if you customize this, this will help you get noticed. Like, if you take this extra step, this is how you are going to avoid someone just grouping letters together when they're doing their count on how many messages have been received. If you share your story here, it allows our lobbying team to, when they're meeting with key policymakers, to share. These are broad experiences that we have received when we're writing public comment, where we can best elevate in our submissions to the federal government, the experiences of people. In the end, we have more of an impact when people tell their stories, especially new folks. We don't want anyone coming to NAMI as a new advocate to go, I am so overwhelmed and I have no idea how to get involved. I think that's why we have to have a whole plethora of ways that they can get involved, more information they can have. Our Action Center doesn't just include actions. Our Action Center includes other resources that people can read up on. Our state legislation report, if they want to do that, links off to our Reimagine Crisis campaign page. We have petitions, write a letter, story banks. Like, we have different things for people to get involved in the best way that's for them. Look, I would love to just continue to add advocates and find ways to keep them engaged for the long term. But I also know that some people may feel, all right, I feel comfortable doing this one thing. And if I don't have that one thing, then I'm not going to get that advocate at all. So how can I best build or think through different ways folks are coming in? I wish there was a good acquisition way to bring people in and keep them involved. But in the end, some of it is just, all right, if I'm in their shoes, what might I feel comfortable doing, and how do we get them from there?
I really like that. I like the aspect of just kind of like almost having multiple options, and you're going to find the biggest entry point possible for folks to come in. So what kind of questions do you usually ask in order to encourage more people to share? Are there any types of format or wording that you find particularly effective?
What we've learned is to just stay away from broad, tell us your story. Just use this box to the right, write your story. Like I said, people, mental health advocates specifically, but people of all kinds want to share. When they want to share their story, they'll share all of their story. It's difficult to read through 1,000 words on the back end of a story campaign. We want to help structure their story. So one, they're not spending time just typing away. That's not a great use of their time to just enter it all on that small box. It can be cathartic, but in terms of advocacy, that's not always going to be the most effective use of their time. And for us on the back end, that makes it difficult to comb through or use different stories or lift them up. So we want to pose some of these guiding questions, much like you would ask almost a leading question or a strong ask of a policymaker. Have you specifically experienced this thing? Have you found this thing difficult? Have you done X? Like, we make it very clear that like you can share your story about anything, but these are some of the things that we want you to think of the format. Oftentimes when you start providing some of those bullets in your list of like, we hope your story, like, try to answer some of these questions in your story. Try to do this. And that actually does help guide advocates into sharing more direct or more relevant stories for your advocacy work. Something that we also found a lot of success for the first time us trying it this year is why. We had never thought to just ask our advocates why they advocate with us. So we have tried that in the past around our Vote for Mental Health campaign. So as part of this nonpartisan elections campaign, we have people print out some signs, take a picture of it, like, I vote for mental health because I'm blank and I vote for mental health. Those ways that they can quickly share posts, encourage others to do it. But in terms of our larger grassroots advocates, we never flat out asked, why do you act for mental health? And we did that as part of Mental Health Month, which is May every year. And we saw some great responses. We got hundreds, close to thousands, possibly, responses from folks who are sharing, yeah, I vote for mental health because of this. I'm a NAMI advocate because of this, this, and this. I care about this, and that's why I'm doing this. And they weren't 1,000 words. They were under 200. They were quick to the point. Like, I do this because, or NAMI has brought me in because of this. And that not only helps us when we're trying to frame the impact of our advocacy work, especially when we need to convey our impact or our successes in the budget season, or as we're talking with leadership and showing just the different value of advocacy and measuring that, but it also helps other teams. For example, NAMI's impact report, which is pulled together by our development team. And now we have some great quotes from different advocates that help power that. Or advocacy alerts where we can plug in, like, this is from someone directly who shared why they're an advocate and stand with us and join it. So seeing some of, there was the barrier of me not coughing through this session. I think what we've seen a lot of success is, so to recap on that very long answer, is very direct questions explaining what we hope to get out of it to help guide people on how to answer. And then sometimes you can really just benefit by asking, why are you here? And why are you advocating? And people will be clear to share some of those.
I really appreciated all that. Yeah, your turn to go off mute and take the sip of water. Yeah, we joked about how we both have a cough coming into this, and we'd probably get interrupted. There's so much I could dig into all that. That's exactly what I love to hear as someone who works on a customer success team. I really like that aspect of just like, we never asked them why. We should probably do that. But let's to kind of continue along though. So once you have some stories gathered, how do you operationalize sharing those with lawmakers?
So I think this is something that is always a work in progress for us. For a few instances, our Reimagine Crisis campaign, we knew it would benefit us. So let me take a step back here. Reimagine Crisis is a national partnership led by NAMI of over 55 organizations, all with a specific interest in reimagining our crisis response system. For far too long, law enforcement was the de facto first responders for mental health. It still is in many places. But pre-988, there were 10-digit numbers to try to remember in a crisis to contact if you wanted to talk to support. So 988 really was that transformative moment. 988 is the new 3-digit number for anyone nationwide to call, text, or chat during a mental health, substance use, or suicide crisis. But 988 in itself isn't the only thing that needs to change. We need people who can answer calls 24/7 and provide help and local support. And we've got that. People can contact 988 from anywhere, anytime in the US. But we also need mental health first responders, almost mobile crisis teams that are available to de-escalate in-person situations, and really just help connect people to support on the ground. We need a crisis stabilization options to think of like short-term living room-like settings as an alternative to emergency rooms that are often unprepared to help people in crisis. So we knew we needed to lift up people's experiences with the past crisis system and talk about what works. So by pulling through some of our different crisis stories and bringing it together with the 3 pillars of this ideal crisis system, by lifting up those stories, it does help policymakers go, all right, that's not just an idea. This is how it would help, or this is how it has helped in communities that do have it. So by weaving stories in, that creates a great leave behind that our lobbyists or a state lobbyist or anyone who is part of the partnership can share there. In some ways, I mentioned it before, we try to weave in stories where possible through some of the more impactful public comments that NAMI submits to the administration on regulatory changes. I think we all know in the policy space that we can share very detailed and wonky information. It is Wonk Week, but how do we make it more impactful or show the benefit? NAMI is an organization of people with lived experience. We are not a guild, a professional guild. We're people impacted in the community. We're the millions of people affected by mental health conditions. So how do we illustrate that in our work? And I think that's where we can weave in stories into those comments, weave in stories into one-pagers we create on particular issues for the Hill, weave in stories, we create a bank of stories that we have been reviewed, have been marked, we file them away. And when our lobbyist comes over to us and goes, I'm meeting with X person, do we have anything from this district or this state? We can comb through and go like, this one is particularly impactful, or we've seen this. So that helps us really start bringing some of those pieces together. I think it's a work in progress because we receive so many stories and there are so many different types of government relations activities that are happening. And I think we can always find, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it anyway. We can always find more synergy there of how to knit those together. It's something that is a priority for me because I think we do need to elevate that voice of lived experience throughout more of our work where possible and where appropriate.
Really great. No, I appreciate all that and the corporate buzzword of synergy as well. Big not fan of that one. We can talk tiger teams and all the other great buzzwords at some point. So a couple more questions before we hand it over kind of to the Q&A portion. So we've spoken a lot about specifically share your story campaigns, but to broaden the application of what we're discussing today, I'd love to hear some ways you approach storytelling in your advocacy efforts more broadly.
That is a good one. So for storytelling, like I don't mean to like jump back to the beginning, but really you cannot advocate without stories. You cannot advocate without people sharing their experiences. You can send form letters. You can make a bunch of phone calls. You can read off a script, and there are valid applications of each of those. But at the heart of it, where you are most impactful is not vanity metrics, which you can report out we have sent X number of letters. We've done this. And those are valid statistics and valid metrics that we need to share out to folks. That's what leadership does care about oftentimes. That is what funders want to hear. They want to hear reach. Like, there are appropriate times for those stats. For me, the value really lies in the qualitative. It relies on just, are we making people feel more comfortable to customize a letter? Are we equipping that? How are we helping people just find their way into these different storytelling opportunities? Are there different opportunities that we can reach out to people? You know, if I'm speaking broadly here for folks, I'm sure a lot of people here get media requests, right? Like, reporters want to speak to people who have been affected by X, Y, or Z policy issue. If you have a list of folks who you know feel comfortable sharing their story, that gives you a list of folks who might be potential spokespeople or people you can help feel more comfortable with elevating levels of storytelling, even broadly outside of just going into your story bank. I think stories, like I said, need to be woven into other pieces of your organization's work, from one-pagers that may not necessarily be going up to the hill, but might live on your website and might help others see things. Are there places you can build into your website to connect people to your action center? NAMI has a larger website that isn't our action center, but we find ways to cross-link and bring people together because stories are so important. We are rather effective at story collection that we do hear from other teams at the organization who are like, do you have anyone who might fit this? Right? Like, we want to have all of these different work streams come together. And share your story campaign is one part of the process, but you don't just want the data on the back end. You just don't want a swarm of grassroots actions just for the sake of it. How can you help someone better customize an email? How can you get people to feel more comfortable taking an extra step if once you review, you think they might be a good storyteller? How do you weave this through more of your organization's work? And those are just ongoing conversations that are important to have with your team, with other teams at your organization, to think about, all right, we're doing this to try to drive this action, but where else can we be better or more intentional about this? So it's not just someone submitting something for submission's sake.
I really like all that. I like how the idea of kind of weaving it in to everything else is really critical. The idea of kind of, we're not just sending to send's sake, like, what is the point and purpose of this? And really ties back to some of the things you were talking about earlier of also kind of like building out that advocacy base. So last question before we push over to Q&A. Now that we've gone through the why and the how, just zoomed in on me, the why and the how, would you be able to bring everything together with an example of a share your story campaign and what the impact looked like?
Ooh, that is a good one. And the coughing is not for vamping. So I think there are a few ways we've really weaved it together. I think I've touched on a few, but let's take the Reimagine Crisis work for a second. We have been engaging on alternative crisis response for some time now. It hasn't just been around 988. It's been something that we've been working on for years. So we've asked people over the years about those crisis stories. This wasn't just something that we spun up in the last year and a half, 2 years. It's something that we wanted to bring in folks and learn what our community is experiencing, because that shows the highlight of these issues. We then started engaging really heavily around the designation of 988 and then the launch, the nationwide availability in July 2022. Through that process, that was not only story collection, but that was ensuring we did have customizable parts of any letters that we were sending up to the Hill. That was making sure that people had opportunities to share those stories directly with policymakers. That helped us when we were building the Reimagine Crisis campaign website and building out a specific stories page, was going through and finding these real world examples that we could highlight as need and helped by different crisis response. And that then helps us bring in those additional stories that we continue to collect. For that weaved itself into NAMI's annual report, that weaved its way into different press that we've done. NAMI has been a leading voice with the media around 988 and crisis response. That's found its different way into a lot of different work. And it's not even necessarily a very specific part of our Share Your Story campaign, but more of an elevated story sharing as part of the 1 year of 988 activities we were doing over the summer. We held a lot of different events, but we partnered with The Hill, the Capitol focused news organization, to do an event around 988 and crisis response. And in that event, we had a speaker who was the retired Denver police chief, who is also a NAMI affiliate board member, Paul Payson. And he got up and he shared not only his experience as a police chief of a major metropolitan city, but as someone who had a loved one in a mental health crisis. And he, as a police chief, could not find the resources or help that he needed in this moment. And the room went quiet, and policymakers went quiet, and people were sitting there rapt at attention, listening to Chief Paul talk about his personal experience, which only builds on the work that we've done previously to collect other stories and lift them up, to change the narrative, to get people involved in sending letters to the Hill and customizing those. It's not just about what campaign is in your action center. It's about how you can think about different opportunities to just weave stories throughout all of your work. And that's how you'll be most impactful. It's not something that just lives online. It's how you then use the work that you built.
That's really amazing, and a really good wrap up to kind of the full story you were sharing today. Handing it over to the Q&A portion. So now we have time to take questions, or speakers have time to take questions. So if you've submitted over to the Q&A, we're going to dig into that. Let me jump over and make sure I can choose some of the best ones. We've got actually quite a few. So I like this first one from Madeline. How do you prepare storytellers for the potential of negative feedback in media?
Ooh. So some of it comes down to, we do a lot of additional prep when we connect storytellers to anything outside of our ecosystem. When I say ecosystem, right, like we're doing prep regardless. We're making sure that people feel comfortable or know how we're using their stories. When we make additional connections, we don't necessarily have media training for all of our storytellers or any of that. What we do help people realize is like, all right, we're going to lay out the full picture for you the best we can. We try to talk people through. We're like, we will not make this connection if you do not feel comfortable with this. We want to just provide people with the full landscape who may not feel most comfortable. I'm privileged that two of my colleagues, including our chief advocacy officer, are key spokespeople for the organization. So have a lot of like real world experience talking about a lot of these issues. And that just helps guide a bit. That's why we also look towards alternatives too. You feel comfortable in writing. You may not feel comfortable talking to the press. Would you feel comfortable if we did a one-pager? Maybe we have a photo there, like that can live on our website or with our lobbyists. Like, what do you feel most comfortable with? If we have video opportunities, would you feel comfortable speaking direct to camera without? So it's for us, it's just, here's the full picture. We can't necessarily change anything that happens after that, but we want to work within your comfort levels to do it. I hope that gets to the question at hand, and apologies if not.
I like that. Continuing down with some of the other questions, and I see we got our little last minute timer kind of pushing through here. So this one comes from Alana. When sharing the stories of advocates, how do you ensure multiple different stories are being captured in terms of diversity?
That is a really good question. For us, it comes to, like, when we're using stories, it really comes down to those additional follow-up that we do. I have a great colleague who I don't believe is on here today, who reviews a lot of our stories. And when we go through those stories, we are looking for things that really stand out as overlapping tie-in with the policy that we are doing. And then we're doing that follow-up, right? Like, we're not just taking the story directly there in most cases and just using it for the sake of it, and then we move on. If someone shares a really good story, but we don't have a very specific use case at the moment, we do outreach and we learn more about their experiences in their story. For us too, diversity of mental health experience is also really important. We have a very large big tent community of people who are peers with lived experience, who are family members, who are community leaders. We don't just want one story of one type of experience, because that does not show the full impact of the work that we are doing there. So for us, we do spend the extra time to learn directly from people about their different experiences in the space. We also try to build in some custom fields into our registration forms before story collection, depending on what the story bank is specifically about. So when we try to build in, if we're doing a crisis story, right, we want to try to collect and tag these stories earlier on, so we can just learn a bit more about people. NAMI is a larger demographic process that we're going through, of revamping how we collect different demographics on folks, so we can ensure a broad swath of diversity among different folks engaging. I would say that a registration form is kind of difficult to do some of that. So some of it comes on what we learn more from people as we have these conversations. So our registration form doesn't start driving folks to just not complete all of the fields and just give up before they can tell their story.
Thank you for sharing. I'm reverse ordering these Q&As now to go to some earlier questions. So this one comes from Jessica. Thank you for the great work NAMI does. Curious, for costly efforts like a NAMI walk, how do you justify the cost was worth it? Moving people in the door and up the ladder can take time and can be hard to pinpoint specific advocate entry.
So I will say, for like NAMI walks are really done at that state and local level, working with another team at our organization, Alliance Relations, that focuses on best supporting different organizations throughout NAMI. For me, what I am honored is that they're like, we send out this email series already. Can you, like, do you have an email you want to plug in? We swap it out for a few different ones, like Vote for Mental Health during election season. We've got a general advocate petition in there now. For me, on the advocacy side, it's thinking mostly, all right, this set of communications already exists, but previously they weren't getting connected into the system in this way. How do we try to tie this together? You're in the NAMI ecosystem somehow. How do we bring you in? For my advice outwardly, it's look at what your organization is already sending out and where this might plug in, or where you might be able to bring people into the work. Is there a newsletter that maybe you have a standing piece at the bottom that is a general like action or actually always start with the general action, right? Like if you're going to start plugging it into other types of work, the drop off you'll have from folks who may not feel more comfortable at that level is quite high. So how do you get them in the door first? And then you at least know, all right, I got these people through the petition that we have in the newsletter. I know we can bring in folks that way. Like we can follow up. Hey, you've been receiving the newsletter for a while. Consider sharing your story. I don't think you need to necessarily add any additional costs to you as an advocate or an advocacy department when there are other opportunities, if you have those good relationships across teams to start building it in. Then it's just, all right, which campaigns that maybe I can unlist can I spin off, or which UTM tracking codes can I build in to learn more about behavior and then better target on the back end. So I can send a custom message to these people about this specific thing and their specific past activity, which then, why am I having fireworks go off? That is, I'm going to just end my answer there. But yes, I think it's just figuring out where people already are and then bringing them in from there.
That was a great way to cap your point. Surprise fireworks. I don't know. I didn't do that. No one did that. Maybe it's our admins trying to tell us to move along. So we'll, Brandon, I appreciate it. It's always great to spend time with you and see how you're working. Do you want to do one final plug for NAMI, your work, or anything before I do our outro?
Sure thing. I appreciate everyone for joining this session today. I really do love talking about storytelling, and the reason why is I cannot do my job without people who feel comfortable getting involved or have those stories to tell. I think no matter what organization, no matter what company, no matter what issue area, we all work with such dedicated, passionate people. And for us, it's really about how we can turn that passion into change and think that big picture way there. So if you do feel so moved, nami.org/take action. My colleague Stephanie had dropped our Action Center link in the chat earlier. Really, we welcome everyone with a story to tell as part of this movement. You don't need to necessarily be personally affected by mental health and mental illness. We want you to feel comfortable if you want to see change in the way our country treats mental health and treats mental health care. I think we can do a lot of great work together. And just, I'm grateful for all of you in the advocacy space who are trying to change the world for the better in your own work. Joseph, it was great as always, and thankful to Quorum for the opportunity to talk a bit more about NAMI's advocacy work. I know I don't have a slide up, but if you want to reach out, bgraham@nami.org. Happy to chat more about anything.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brandon. And with that, we're coming up on the end of our time. So thank you to everyone for joining us. We really appreciate it. The next session is coming up at 12, is how to get noticed at work. That's with Cecily Simpson. To join, you'll just go back to the main stage, and I believe there's a link you can enter through from there. Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you to the NAMI team, and thanks for our admins in the background who kept all this going. Take care, everybody.